Dear students, let us learn about the classification of sulci that will be seen in relation to the cerebral hemisphere. In this picture, you are seeing the various grooves, that is the sulci, and elevated areas, that is the gyri, in relation with the superolateral surface of cerebrum you are seeing in this picture. So what is the purpose of formation of sulci and gyri? So the purpose is for accommodation of a larger surface area, which is around 2200 square centimeters of the cerebral cortex in very limited space within the cranial cavity. So for that it has to be folded into number of convolutions or elevations that are known as gyri, which are separated by the grooves known as sulci or fissures. So the large surface area of cerebral cortex has to be accommodated within the limited space in the cranial cavity. So to accommodate it in the cranial cavity, the cerebral cortex is folded into number of elevations that are called gyri, which are separated by sulci or fissures. And only 1/3 of cerebral cortex is exposed to the surface as gyri. The rest of 2/3 is hidden in the sulci. Hope you have understood about the purpose of formation of the sulci and gyri. Now let us see the difference between the sulcus and fissure. So what is the sulcus and what is a fissure? So sulcus, it's a shallower groove that will be surrounding the gyrus. As you are seeing in this picture, you can see the shallow groove surrounding the gyrus, which you call it as the sulcus. Whereas fissure is a large furrow that will divide the brain into either two lobes, as in the case of lateral sulcus or Sylvian fissure, which separates the frontal from the temporal lobes of the cerebrum on the superolateral surface. Whereas in the case of two hemispheres, they are also separated by a large furrow known as the median longitudinal fissure, which separates the cerebrum into a right cerebral hemisphere and left cerebral hemisphere. So sulcus is shallow groove surrounding the gyrus. Fissure is large furrow dividing the brain into lobes or two hemispheres. Now let us see the functional importance of formation of sulci and gyri. So if the surface area of cerebrum is increased, more functions can be made possible. So more the surface area of cerebrum and more functions. And if the surface of brain is smooth, it will grow only to a certain extent. If the sulcus or fissure are there, it allows continued growth, which in turn will increase the function. Coming to the development of the sulci. So how do they develop? Up to third month of intrauterine life, the surface of hemispheres are smooth. So the sulci and gyri, they follow a sequence in their appearance during development. During the fourth month of intrauterine life, the lateral sulcus will appear on the superolateral surface, and the submerged gyrus underlying this lateral sulcus will form the insula, which is a separate lobe that will develop with the appearance of the lateral sulcus during the fourth month of intrauterine life. During the sixth month of intrauterine life, the central sulcus, which separates the motor and sensory areas, then the parieto-occipital sulcus, the calcarine sulcus and cingulate sulcus, it will appear during the sixth month of intrauterine life. During the seventh month of intrauterine life, all important sulci will be formed. So, up to third month, the cerebral hemispheres are smooth. Then, starting from fourth month, the lateral sulcus will appear, followed by the central parieto-occipital, calcarine and cingulate sulci during the sixth month. And by about seventh month, all important sulci will be formed. Now let us discuss about the classification of sulci. The sulci can be classified based on their function, based on the formation of sulci, based on the continuity of sulci, and based on depth of sulci. So these are the four basic types of sulci into which the various sulci can be grouped. So let us look into the classification based on function. So there are three types of sulci under this group. That is the limiting sulcus, the axial sulcus and operculated sulcus. Under the classification based on formation, there is a primary sulcus and secondary sulcus. These are the two subcategories. Under the classification based on continuity, they can be classified into continuous or uninterrupted sulcus, a sulcus with lesser interruption, and sulcus that is regularly interrupted. Regarding the classification based on depth, can be divided into a complete sulcus and an incomplete sulcus. So this is the broader classification of various sulci. Now let us discuss the subcategories under each category of the classification we have discussed. So under the classification based on function, the categories of sulci are the limiting sulcus, the axial sulcus and operculated sulcus. These are the three types of sulci under this category. Let us see what is limiting sulcus. So this sulcus limits two different functional areas. Limits two different functional areas. What's an example for it? So one example is the central sulcus, which you will see on the superolateral surface, and it separates the sensory cortex, that is, which is granular and is located in the postcentral gyrus behind the central sulcus, from the agranular motor cortex, that is precentral gyrus, in front of this central sulcus. So it separates the motor and sensory cortexes and the granular and agranular cortex. The other example for the limiting sulcus is the anterior part of calcarine sulcus. It separates the visual cortex below from the isthmus of limbic lobe between the cingulate and parahippocampal gyri that are placed above. So the anterior part of calcarine sulcus is separating the visual cortex from the isthmus of limbic lobe, which is placed between the cingulate and parahippocampal gyri. Then, what is axial sulcus? So, axial axis. This sulcus grows along the long axis of a rapidly growing area. Then, what is the example for the axial sulcus? The posterior part of calcarine sulcus. So the visual cortex, it grows along this part of the sulcus, that is the posterior part of calcarine sulcus. So this part, it includes the cuneus and lingual gyrus, which you will see on the medial surface of cerebral hemisphere. So now you know what is a limiting sulcus, what's an axial sulcus, and the examples for each of them. And coming to the operculated sulcus. So the lips of this sulcus separates two different areas, and within its substance it will have a third area. So the lips are separating two areas and the substance of it contains the third area. And the example of it is the lunate sulcus, which is seen on the superolateral surface of the occipital lobe, and that comes in contact with the calcarine sulcus, posterior extension of it. And this sulcus has two lips that will be separating the striate area, that is area 17, from the peristriate area, that is area 19. And within the walls and floor of the sulcus will be the third area. It is known as the parastriate area or area 18. Now let us see some of the sulci on the superolateral surface of the cerebral hemisphere. So here you can see the central sulcus, so which is an example for limiting sulcus, separating the precentral gyrus, which is motor, from the postcentral gyrus, which is sensory in function. So this is the central sulcus. The anterior part of calcarine sulcus is the other example, but you will see it on the medial surface. Then coming to the axial sulcus, the posterior part of calcarine sulcus you are seeing. So this is the posterior part of calcarine sulcus. Part of it you will see on the superolateral surface. Most of it will be in the medial surface. Then, which we will discuss when we see the medial surface of cerebral hemisphere image. Then coming to the operculated sulcus, which you can see here, the lunate sulcus, which is an example for the operculated sulcus, that will be having two lips, which will have striate and the peristriate areas, and within the depth of it will have the parastriate area 17, 18 and 19 will be located in relation with the lunate sulcus. Now let us discuss the categories under the group, the classification of sulci based on formation. So they can be classified into primary sulci, and secondary sulci. Let us see what are primary sulci. So these sulci, they develop independently. Most of the sulci come under the category of primary sulci. Whereas the secondary sulci, their development is secondary to something else. So their development depends on other factors. What are the examples for the secondary sulci? The lateral sulcus, okay, which you will see on the superolateral surface. We are seeing the lateral sulcus which starts on the inferior surface in relation with the interpeduncular fossa. So from there it is coming onto the superolateral surface. So the lateral sulcus formation is dependent on something else. The development of insula is responsible for the formation of the lateral sulcus. Then the other example is the parieto-occipital sulcus. So the parieto-occipital sulcus, which you are seeing here along the superomedial border of the cerebral hemisphere, 5 centimeters in front of the occipital pole. So what is the basis for the development of this sulcus? So this sulcus has developed because of backward growth of corpus callosum, the white band of fibers connecting the two cerebral hemispheres. So because of the backward growth of the corpus callosum, the parieto-occipital sulcus is formed. So now you know what is primary sulcus that develop independently and secondary sulci that develop because of some other factor. The examples being lateral sulcus that develops because of insula formation, the parieto-occipital sulcus that develops because of backward growth of corpus callosum. Now let us discuss the sulci based on the continuity. So here the sulci are broken into segments because of the gyri that will be crossing them, and here there are three categories of sulci. One is the continuous or uninterrupted sulcus. The example is the lateral sulcus, so which is a continuous one without any interruption. And there are certain sulci with lesser interruption. The example is the central sulcus, which you are seeing on the superolateral surface. Then the collateral and calcarine sulcus, which you will see on the medial surface of cerebral hemisphere. Then the third variety here is the sulci that are regularly interrupted. So what are they? They are the post-central sulcus, which is parallel to the central sulcus. Then the superior and inferior frontal sulci, so in relation with frontal lobe. So these are the sulci that are regularly interrupted. Now let us discuss the various sulci under the category of classification based on the depth of sulcus. There are two groups under this heading. One is the complete sulcus, the other is the incomplete sulcus. So let us see what is a complete sulcus. So let us see it on the medial surface of the cerebral hemisphere. A complete sulcus is one which produces elevations in the walls of lateral ventricles. So the lateral ventricle is the cavity of the cerebral hemisphere, and each lateral ventricle will be having an anterior horn in relation with the frontal lobe, a posterior horn in relation with the occipital lobe, and an inferior horn which extends into the temporal lobe, with the central part of our body which is located in the parietal lobe part. So let us see the complete sulci The examples for which are the collateral sulcus and anterior part of calcarine sulcus. The collateral sulcus, which you can see in this picture, this is the collateral sulcus extending from occipital to the temporal lobe in the medial surface. So this collateral sulcus, it produces elevation known as collateral eminence in the floor of inferior horn of lateral ventricle. So the inferior horn is in the temporal lobe. So this collateral sulcus will produce an elevation known as collateral eminence in the floor of inferior horn of lateral ventricle. Then the other example is the anterior part of calcarine sulcus that will produce an elevation known as the calcar avis in the floor of posterior horn of the lateral ventricle, so which is located in the occipital lobe. So it produces the elevation calcar avis. Then this anterior part of calcarine sulcus is also an example for the limiting sulcus. So this anterior part of it is separating the limbic lobe known as the isthmus from the visual cortex. From the visual cortex it is separating. That's why it's an example for both the complete sulcus and the limiting sulcus. Then what are incomplete sulci? These incomplete sulci are superficially located. So what are they? They are the paracentral sulci. The examples for this paracentral sulci are the precentral sulcus in front of the central sulcus and postcentral sulcus behind the central sulcus, which is seen most of its extent on the superolateral surface. Then coming to the posterior part of calcarine sulcus, which you can see in this picture. So this posterior part of calcarine sulcus, it is growing along the visual area, and this is between the cuneus we are seeing above and the lingual gyrus below. So which is an example for the axial sulcus that you can see on the medial surface. With this, we have discussed the various sulci that will be seen in relation with the cerebral hemisphere and the classification with examples we have discussed.